Hi, my name's Jane Pierce. My business is Tarot Jane, and I'm here to talk to you about astrology. What I want to share with you is the planets of harmony and conflict, Venus and Mars, and some of the things that they're going to be doing that might affect you, both in how you find beauty and how you find conflict and fights in the first half of 2024. Now, the lucky part is neither of these planets will be going retrograde in the first half of 24. Venus won't go retrograde at all, and Mars doesn't start that dance until December 6th. If we look in the first half of the year, we have some wildly different extremes in what Venus and Mars are doing. So let's kind of do a dance about what these first 6 months are going to be, letting you know we're going to cover 6 signs of the zodiac. So before we talk about Mars and Venus, let me just run through a little bit about Sagittarius, because Venus and Mars are both in Sagittarius when the year begins. And that's probably one of the best parts about this year. We have a tremendous amount of this year, specifically January, February, March, and a tiny bit of April, that Venus and Mars are going to be in the same sign. And while they're not conjunct, they don't come exactly together till February. When these two planets and all of their power are combined in a single sign, we get to feel the best of both of them. However, each sign is going to bring out different degrees of their best or worst. So let me just mention Sagittarius, where we start the year, is mutable fire. And that energy works better with Mars than with Venus. Mars loves fire signs, although it is at its best in Aries. Venus is at its best in Taurus and Libra. And luckily, we're going to get Mars in Aries and Venus in Taurus in the first half of the year. So that's going to be a great opportunity to experience those planets at their best. Wherever these planets are in your natal chart, you should look that up and figure out, how do those planets, Mars and Venus, from your natal birth chart, how do the signs those planets are in get along with each of the signs I'm going to talk about? And what I'm going to talk about is Sagittarius through Gemini. That's 6 of the 12 zodiacal signs. And that's because Venus is going to move from the start of the year in Sagittarius all the way through to Gemini by the time we get to June. So let's look a little deeper about when those two planets are dancing together and when they dance apart. Specifically, as I said, Venus and Mars start the year in Sagittarius. They're going to both move into Capricorn a couple weeks apart. They kind of have this feeling where Venus is chasing Mars. You see, when Mars was in Leo and Venus was too, they came really close to a conjunction, a coming together. Just before that magical coming together, that mystical marriage of Mars and Venus, the male and female signs happened, Venus slowed down and went retrograde. And so it's taken all of 23 and a little bit of 24 before Venus and Mars lived up to that joining that they were teasing us about last summer in July, with them both in Leo. So here's what happens. They start the year in Sagittarius. Mars, which usually moves slower than Venus, is the first to enter Sag and the first to leave. So here we go. Venus will leave Sagittarius not until the 23rd of January, but Mars, who, like I said, is still far ahead of Venus, and Venus is trying to catch up with it, and has been since it left the retrograde in Leo. Mars leaves Sagittarius on the 4th of January. So very quickly, we get a little shot in 2024 of them together in the same sign, and Mars moves on. What happens is that Venus and Mars, when we get to the end, Venus and Mars, yes, when we get to the end of January, both have very powerful trines. They are less engaged with each other, although they both are sharing the sign of Capricorn. Then they are engaged with two big planets that have similar energies. Venus and Jupiter are known as the lesser for Venus, the greater for Jupiter, the benefic planets. These are the best. These are the planets that give us the most generalized good feeling. Mars is considered the lesser malefic, and Saturn the greater malefic, but Mars won't be meeting Saturn until we get into April. Instead, Mars, with all its fiery, fast, and shocking energy, is going to meet Uranus, the planet that truly embodies rebellion, shock, lightning strikes, and surprises. Well, imagine the fire of Mars meeting the lightning strike of Uranus. That energy is going to be shocking. And while they won't meet until Mars actually gets to Taurus, on the 27th of January, Mars gets exactly conjunct with Mercury, and we're getting hot and fast words. And then on the 29th of January, Mars trines Uranus, and that energy of the lightning strike flows so quickly into the fire of Mars. We are going to have hotter, shockier, faster changes than we're used to. Now, coming so close to Mars meeting Mercury, you would imagine that those angry words or fast thoughts, depends on if we get the better or the worse of the possibilities, are going to blend very easily into the shocking changes that Mars trining Uranus is going to give us at the end of January. And that's some rough energy. However, Venus is around to help us out. Venus, much earlier in Capricorn, is going to be trining Jupiter. And when the two benefic planets form a positive or harmonious trine, they are at their best. Probably the only thing better than a trine between Venus and Jupiter would be their conjunction. And we'll get that in May. So we start January with both of them in Sagittarius, and by the end of January, they're both doing big things at the end of January, with two of them in Capricorn, Venus and Mars, and Mercury added in, and they're reacting to Uranus and Jupiter both in Taurus. As a matter of fact, coincidentally, or because there's an amazing machinery of the universe that comes together, the moon will be trining Mars and Uranus together on the 29th, and it will trine Venus and Jupiter just as they become exact on the 28th. So expect these really big highs and lows. Two planets in Capricorn, two planets in Taurus, at least the ones that are most important, both of them trining, both of them highlighted in this Earth trine, with a grand trine created by the moon reaching in to Capricorn and Taurus from the other Earth sign, Virgo. And so we are going to have some intense positive and intense negative energies in the practical areas of our life. As a matter of fact, it's probably more shocking for that combo because they are Mars and Venus from Capricorn are affecting Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus. So expect us to have really big, practical, financial, physical changes. And whether we can make the best of those shocking shifts, we're going to be relying on how well Venus is keeping the peace and Jupiter is being benefic and generous in those practical areas. As we look at February, we've got Valentine's Day and some hot and heavy energy. Within 8 days, we are going to have both Venus and Mars conjunct Pluto in the very beginning of Aquarius. First, Mars conjuncts Pluto, then Venus conjuncts Pluto, then they conjunct each other. So on Valentine's Day, we have Mars and Pluto, which is a dark, hot, and heavy energy, a lot of taboo and physical aggressiveness. And then Venus conjuncts Pluto, and we get the dark, almost think Persephone and Pluto, and the story about, is Persephone the victim of Pluto, or is she empowered to become queen of her own realm as she joins Pluto as his wife? It certainly depends on your perspective. And that's going to be a lot of what we're seeing with these energies of harmony and conflict coming into connection with the deep psychological and buried, hidden, taboo energy of Pluto. And if that wasn't enough of the stirring up, the 14th sees Pluto-Mars conjunction. The 17th of February has Venus and Pluto conjunction. And then by the 22nd, Mars and Venus come together and conjunct each other. So I'm going to suggest from the 14th to the 22nd, and certainly a couple days on either side, we are really going to have some very sexual, very provocative, and possibly taboo or kinky, or at least things you don't want other people to see happening. I hope it leads you to an amazingly enjoyable Valentine's Day in late February. And perhaps if love and romance are not what you are looking for, then what you'll find is a powerful creative urge, while the ambition and the heat of Mars meets the beauty and creative harmony of the artistry of Venus. Let that energy come together for you in February, and I hope you have a wonderful time. Now let's look at what happens in March. It takes a couple weeks. As a matter of fact, it's not until March 12th that Venus enters Pisces, followed on March 22nd with Mars entering Pisces. Already, Venus is speeding ahead of Mars following that February conjunction. And each of them are going to face two major planets as they move through Pisces. Just like we had one then the other trining Uranus and Jupiter, and one and the other conjuncting Pluto in February. In March and early April, we have both Venus and Mars meeting up with Saturn and then Neptune. So let me give you those dates. It's March 21st that Venus meets Saturn. This Saturn limits can put some damper on the beauty and harmony that we find, and joy and pleasure that we find from Venus. However, if you're ready to engage in a little nostalgia, a muted joy that almost takes pleasure in the nostalgic and melancholy energy of looking at the past, you may find March 21st a muted pleasure and a chance to revisit past joys. And then Mars joins in and heats that stuff up a little bit. Before Mars can get all the way to finding Saturn, Venus will meet Neptune at the end of Pisces. And Venus and Neptune are harmony with the planet of belief and spirituality. Think of powerful spiritual energy that you could have around April 3rd when Venus and Neptune come together. But be careful. With all of that pleasure and all of that dreamy belief energy, you could find yourself overindulging in mind-altering activities and substances, or you may find that the dreams you create are so pleasurable that you don't look to see how real they are. And so once we get to April 3rd and that very pleasurable, watery Venus, and Venus, by the way, loves being in Pisces, so that, and Neptune loves being in Pisces. We've got two planets in one of their favorite signs coming together. Powerful, almost euphoric energy that's quickly followed by the harsh reality. As I said earlier, Mars and Saturn are considered the two malefic planets, and they will come together on April 10th, forcing us to end things in both hot and cold ways, fast and slow. When Mars and Saturn aren't working well together, and they struggle whenever they do come together, Mars wants to fast, hot end. Saturn wants a cold, slow end. Mars cuts things off with a flaming sword, and Saturn freezes them out and prunes them. Those two energies come together on April 10th. We may feel a push-pull, a hurry up and wait, a hot and cold, a fast and slow that can be very frustrating. And adding to that heat, Mars will be ruling the Aries solar eclipse that happens on April 8th. So to have Mars so close to Saturn and ruling Aries, and therefore the Aries new moon eclipse happening just days before Mars and Saturn come together, we're looking at some really rough couple days. How far that goes is hard to say. Some people will place that because we have a lunar eclipse back in March, that we will feel this energy building from March 25th's eclipse until April 8th's solar eclipse. Other people will give it a smaller window. I hate to say your mileage will vary, but it will. And some of what will depend on is how is your natal chart set in those areas. If you have a lot of things in the midst of Pisces through the midst of Aries, it's about 30 or 40 degrees that we are going to have these really intense things happening. And while Mars and Saturn are in Pisces and the eclipse is in Aries, they're still going to be stirring up a lot of energy. If you've got planets in that range of your chart, you can expect that time to be a lot more intense for you. The good news is that that energy doesn't stay. When on April 5th, Venus goes into Aries, so before the eclipse and before Mars and Saturn meet up, Venus moves out of the sign that Mars is in. It moves into Aries. And while Mars rules that sign, it is really good for Aries to get away from Mars before this rough stuff that's happening in the 8th, 9th, and 10th. So April 5th sees Venus moving into Aries, and by April 29th, Venus moves out of Aries and is once again in a sign that it does really well. So we have a short couple weeks that we suffer through that Venus in Aries. Unfortunately, Mars and Saturn and the eclipse are happening then too. So that time that Venus is uncomfortable in Aries has got a lot more uncomfortable energy running. The good news is that come April 29th, Venus will move into Taurus, and Venus rules Taurus, and it's at its best in Taurus and Libra. In the first half of the year, we get to have one of those places, Venus in its home sign. Excuse me, this energy is even better than Venus and Pisces. And we are going to find some extra benefits because Jupiter is there waiting for Venus to catch up. And if Mars and Saturn together in April is the meeting of the two malefic planets, Venus and Jupiter together in Taurus is the meeting of the two benefic planets. So look for all of May to have a much brighter energy. Among those dates in May, there's going to be a new moon on May 7th. The new moon means that the sun and the moon are both in Taurus, along with Jupiter and Uranus. Now, Uranus is not adding any benefits. The shocks of Uranus are not comfortable for Venus and Jupiter, who want to make everything smooth and pleasant. But with Venus and Jupiter, the sun and the moon all together, I think we're going to outweigh some of the shocking parts of Uranus and Taurus. Very soon, we get to have all of these positive energies build and build and build. The sun will leave on the 21st of May and very quickly have a new moon with the sun in Gemini and the moon in Sagittarius, right as Venus and Jupiter on the 23rd, just like the full moon, come conjunct. That day is going to be an amazing party. And hopefully that energy will last of the party and the movement of the two benefics together, that we will find Memorial Day weekend is going to be one amazing and indulgent time. We've got this wonderful energy from the moon in Sagittarius that's got a party feel. We've got the sun in Gemini saying, come on, let's talk. And still, Venus and Jupiter together in Taurus is going to be amazing. Soon after that, though, we get some shifts. Just after Venus meets Jupiter at the very end of Taurus, Venus will move into Gemini on the 23rd, and 2 days later, Jupiter will also move into Gemini. The good news about that is that in late May, just 2 days apart, we get Venus and Jupiter once again sharing a sign, and that's great for everything to do with Gemini. Some of the particular dates you'll want to know in June is that on June 4th, we have a Venus cazimi. A cazimi is when any planet meets the sun. It starts a new cycle, and it allows us to look at the new year or the new cycle that Venus, in this case, restarts by meeting the sun. That energy moving forward will be colored a little bit, this entire cycle, by the fact that Venus and the sun meet in Gemini. You might have heard me talk that the Mars cazimi happened in November, and it was particularly powerful because Mars rules Scorpio. And so when Mars and the sun meet, or the Mars cazimi happens in Scorpio, we have extra strength to that cycle that was created. Now, when Venus cazimi happens in Gemini, unfortunately, it isn't in its home sign. Venus is much happier in Taurus or Pisces than it is in Gemini, but we've got that beauty of Venus adding itself to the words Gemini, and it should be a time of poetry and prose, pretty words, maybe not always honest words, but definitely beautiful ones. The other thing we have happening is the 6th of June, which happens again so close to that Venus cazimi, is a new moon in Gemini, and that bringing together of the sun and the moon and Venus is going to be really powerful. Added in that Jupiter and Mercury are together also in Gemini, and Mercury rules Gemini. We're going to have a really powerfully and beautifully worded time in that piece of our dance. I need to take a deep breath, and I've just shared a whole 6 months of energy with you. So let me make a couple highlights in this. First of all, Venus and Mars have their own dance, but as they meet other planets, the power of their dance and their harmony and conflict increases. In addition to that, the sun and the moon, when we have a new moon or full moon that falls close to some of these significant dates for Mars and Mercury and Venus, those energies are going to be more intense for the addition of the moon cycle, emphasizing it. So in May, when Venus and Jupiter come together, it is even more emphasized that it happens near a full moon. And when Venus meets the sun, it is even more powerful that the moon joins in soon after, and we get a new moon in Gemini. Unfortunately, that same emphasis happens to the negative when Mars and Saturn meet on April 10th, and there's an Aries, which means a Mars-ruled Aries solar eclipse on April 8th. So we've got April 8th and 10th being emphasized in some of that hot and angry energy by the new moon or full moon that happens near it. And we've got May and June emphasizing an even better addition to that Venus energy by having the new moon and full moon emphasize Venus in its glory. In addition to that, in late January, the moon trines Venus and Gemini and Jupiter at the same time. And a day later, the moon trines Mars and Uranus at the same time. So there, the moon is adding an intensity that makes it a little more of a roller coaster for the good and the bad that come on January 28th, 29th. February again, they come together, and the conjunction of Venus and Mars is going to be fantastic. So it looks like we've got both intensities in January, in that both Venus and Mars are having important trines. And then in February, Venus and Mars have important conjunctions with Pluto and each other, making a lot more romance and fun and physical dynamic together in February. March is not so much its own animal, but the beginning of March carrying on the Aquarius energy, in the second half of March beginning the Pisces energy. And then April, they're in different signs doing different stuff, but I'll tell you that April Pisces is going to be hot, and Venus is in the midst of Aries when that eclipse happens. And again, much more positive May and June. So imagine the roller coaster that we're all going to ride, and I hope you find that this information allows you to plan better so that you can ride the roller coaster with intention and purpose, using the energies of the universe and the planets to your advantage. What does that mean? That means if you want to bring people together and find harmonious, joyous, artistic work, do it when Venus is at its best. Even better if Venus is working with Jupiter. And if you want to get rid of something, if you're ready to blow something up, freeze it out, burn it up, and throw the ashes in the water, you're looking at like April is a great time when you've got the planet that cuts hot and fast and the planet cuts slow and cold coming together. So use them not as a good or a bad, but as an energy that when chosen for the right thing, makes you able to do both the easy and the hard, the pleasant and the unpleasant, without that being called good or bad. If you've got more questions, let me know. There's a lot more videos out there and more videos being planned. I hope I see you all soon. Have a wonderful day.